Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Today is Thursday, February 1st. Happy February. Winter's almost over. It's almost sugaring season, Representative Brannigan.
Said the formal Maple Queen.
Yes. So we're going to start our day with H28. We have someone from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. And then we're going to hear from Kirby a little further on 828. And then we have one of our very first field trips as a committee that we've ever taken. We're going to go downstairs to the Education Committee for a joint hearing.
Wow.
I know. We really travel far this Ways and Means Committee.
Fabulous.
And then after a break, we're going to come back up here to continue our work on S18. And we are going to have we're going to have some time available to us today and some time probably available to us tomorrow. And so what I would just encourage folks to do when we are not in committee, go off and think about the education fund. Just like, whether you want to do that by yourself or with each other, just like go meditate on the education fund and think deeply. Okay. And with that, Mr. Tharp, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. Hi, Chair Kornheiser. It's really my pleasure to be on. And my only regret is I can't be there in person, and that I'll be missing out on the field trip later. But it's really a privilege to be here remotely and to share some brief remarks. So I'll just kick off with a quick introduction that I'm Wes Tharp. I'm Senior Advisor for State Tax Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington, D.C. So a quick word about kind of the organization where I work and who I am. CBPP is an independent, nonpartisan research institute that since 1981 has worked to advance both federal and state policies aimed at building a nation where everyone has the resources they need to thrive. As part of that work, we collaborate really closely with a set of state and local partners all over the country to help disseminate high-quality research and to foster evidence-based state policy debates. I've been with the center for about the past 5 years, and in this general line of work for more than 12 years overall. So with that out of the way, I will begin my remarks with the bottom line, that I'm here to voice support for House Bill 828 to adopt a new tax surcharge on the state's highest incomes, because it would be a sound and effective way for Vermont to build a stronger, fair tax system capable of better supporting the state's needs and helping the state's economy be set up for success both today and down the road. So to elaborate on this view, I'm going to briefly touch on 3 points, and then I'm happy to take questions and have conversation for however long is needed and desired at the end. So 1 is that the tax surcharge proposed in this bill is an extremely targeted reform, which will help Vermont maintain and further strengthen its status as one of the more progressive tax codes in the country. 2 is that any potential fears of such a policy harming the state's economy, such as by, say, making it harder to attract and retain residents, are overblown based on available evidence. And 3, that the new revenues raised through this policy could actually play an essential role in not only better supporting Vermont's current needs, but also helping unlock the state's full economic potential over the years to come. So starting with the first, the simple fact is that the surcharge proposed here would affect the tax bills of only a narrow sliver of Vermont taxpayers who are already doing extremely well. According to estimates from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, or ITEP, whom I believe you may have heard from in the past couple of weeks, the proposal would fall almost exclusively on the state's richest 1% of households, or those with average incomes of about $1.8 million a year. The remainder of the state's residents who, to be clear, already themselves contribute significant shares of tax revenue through existing levies on income, sales, and property would see no change. At a time when economic inequality has risen, household wealth remains deeply entrenched, and many low to middle income people are struggling to make ends meet or get ahead, this is the right approach. By adopting it, Vermont would be following the good example of a few other forward-looking states from the past several years, and as I said, would in effect, again, be further building on that hard-earned reputation as one of the more progressive tax codes in the country. Turning to my second point, one of the more common arguments we see come up in these sorts of debates nationwide is that lower income tax rates are more conducive or even essential for states to have strong, durable economic growth. And that in turn, higher tax rates are likelier to harm state economies or drive people away. But those claims are simply not grounded in the facts. For starters, we can look at real-world evidence from states that enacted similar measures in the recent past. If we look at the handful of states that enacted targeted tax increases, sometimes known as millionaires' taxes, on their highest income taxpayers during the 2000s and 2010s, we see that those states had similar economic profiles as their neighbors over the years that followed. In the 8 states, including DC, that adopted these policies over those 2 decades, 7 of the 8 had growth in personal incomes, at least as strong as nearby states in the years that followed. 6 of the 8 had private sector economic growth that met or exceeded their neighboring states, and 5 added jobs at least as quickly as their neighbors. Interestingly, on the flip side, when we instead look at states that chose to follow the anti-tax advice and deeply cut their income tax rates in the past, the flimsiness of that economic argument continues to shine through. So, for example, if you look at the 5 states that cut personal income taxes most deeply during the period following the Great Recession, all 5 of them saw weaker overall GDP growth in the following years than the nation as a whole. 4 of them also had slower growth in personal income and job creation. Now, part of the reason why lower tax states don't reliably outperform their counterparts is that another common claim about state income taxes, that they harm states' ability to attract and retain residents, is also significantly overstated. While taxes do matter around the margins, available data points to non-tax factors such as housing cost, proximity to jobs and family, and climate being far more important. So when households that have moved across states are asked by the US Census why they chose to do so, more than 2/3 report it was either job or family related. That brings me to my third and final point here today, that instead of being a risk to the state's economic future, the revenue measure proposed here could play a key role in helping to put it on an even brighter path. That's because boosting tax revenue in sound, targeted ways and reinvesting the money in people and communities is among the best ways for states to unleash their full potential. That approach enables states to do 2 equally important things. 1, to more adequately support current services, such as good schools, affordable healthcare, and reliable infrastructure that help families and small communities thrive and that they rely on every day. And 2, to make new investments that push states forward by tackling unmet or emerging matters such as child poverty, maternal health, climate resiliency, and housing affordability. So I'll give 3 quick examples from other states to help illustrate this point. So over in Massachusetts, their new levy on incomes above $1 million is already allowing policymakers to do things like enhance and expand public transit, bolster free community college and university scholarships, and retrofit K-12 schools to be more energy efficient and healthy. In Minnesota, a set of measures adopted last year to crack down on corporate tax avoidance and collect more from people at the very top are now funding an ambitious set of policies, including universal free meals for public school students and a new paid leave program. Lastly, in Washington state, a new excise tax on capital gains is already directing at least $500 million in recurring revenue to support and repair K-12 schools and expand childcare and early learning supports. So those 3 aren't alone, as a half dozen other states, including Vermont, I should clearly note, have also raised new revenues in recent years to fund various new initiatives in workers and families. So I'll close by saying that by reducing economic hardship, expanding economic opportunity, and helping to make communities more equitable and affordable, these sorts of shared public commitments, fueled by targeted tax policies that raise sufficient revenue, are both the smart and the right recipe for states to unlock their true promise. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on the measure, and I look forward to any discussion.
Thank you. Any questions for now? Yeah, Jim.
Wes, can you submit your, maybe you already have, but submit your remarks in written form. They're nice, articulate, straightforward, clear, easy to follow. Glad to borrow it.
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to. I'll follow up with an email chain with the relevant staff to get that done.
Thank you.
Yeah, Representative Brennan.
Sir, I have to say, I can think of right off the bat, a handful of my constituents who have gone to Florida and have claimed and have stated to me that it's because of taxes here in Vermont. That these are folks who've lived in town for their whole life, watched a property tax increase, and also been concerned about income tax. And as they retire and grow older, so these are folks who are my age, but mainly older. They go to Florida or to Nevada or someplace that does, or New Hampshire even, if they happen to have relatives over there, someplace that doesn't have income tax or that's they perceive somehow lower taxation state. So I don't know who to believe here. Puzzling, but I look forward to your written remarks to it, and I can read it over and think about it more.
Representative Juice.
I'm just sitting here reflecting as a person who sits in the bands of people who pay the most of my family's income to the taxation. I've never really found it, when I think about what we need to afford, I'm never thinking to myself about taxation. I think more about like, hey, we need to buy a new car in 3 years, right? And I guess what I'm kind of getting at is I find it personally difficult to swallow when someone who's making 4 times as much as me cries poor on this. So those are my comments.
Representative Beck, Demrow, Taylor.
Hey, Wes. So I don't know, yesterday we heard testimony where the person said that people do make changes. This was in the context of a wealth tax discussion, especially later in life, that is the driver. But in your analysis of the different, and I know you research this all over the country, are you aware that the top 1% of income earners in Vermont already pay, I think it's 40% of all income tax, state income taxes that are collected already? And how does that number factor into your analysis?
Yes, sir. That's a very good question, as well as the earlier question, ma'am, on sort of thinking about trends, in terms of broader state migration, particularly later in life, of people potentially moving to Florida and other states. I'd like to lift 2 points here. One is, it is important to look at state personal income taxes, not in isolation, but as part of a state's broader sort of suite of revenue raisers. So if you look at Vermont's tax system as a whole, income, sales, property taxes, other sorts of excise taxes and fees, the top 1% and more broadly sort of upper, if you will, upper middle and increasingly wealthy, say top 20%, don't pay a disproportionately higher share of their income as do middle income or lower income people. Again, once you account for those sales and property taxes and the broad suite of things, most people pay, I believe it's close to or a little around or above 10% of their overall income a year in those state and local taxes. And so the personal income tax viewed in isolation is not necessarily out of kilter relative to other states. On the interstate migration piece, what I would point to is, when you're talking to individuals or in sometimes groups of people, there are certainly cases of people, really taking a hard look at taxes and deciding that's kind of the deciding factor for them of where they're going to move. But when you take a step back and look at the aggregate data kind of as a whole, what you find is that there are some people that leave states in any given year, but they're including from higher tax states to lower tax states, but they're almost completely offset, if you will, by people moving into the state, oftentimes from lower tax jurisdictions. So in the case of Vermont, I was looking at the data a little bit earlier from a comprehensive analysis we have that I can send along. More people move into the state each year than are moving out for a variety of factors, because all states have various things going for them, right? So certain things that are going to be appealing. Florida is a little bit of a unique case because particularly as people get older, for a lot of reasons, cost of living is one, but climate is also another big one. Florida is sort of disproportionately attractive to folks as they do move further up the age spectrum. But two data points I think are really interesting here. One is that roughly 2/3 of people who are leaving Vermont on average every year to Florida are being replaced by people moving from Florida to Vermont, which is a case in point of how, people move for a lot of complex reasons, including things like just being close to family. And so there's that kind of like there's a mix. There's people coming and going at all times. Lastly, and then I'll turn things back over, as I was looking at the Vermont and New Hampshire data, because I would presume New Hampshire being a sort of a no income tax state, that this comes up a lot, that 97% of folks who leave Vermont in a given year to move to New Hampshire are being replaced by people moving from New Hampshire to Vermont. So again, it's a complicated formula. Taxes do matter, but they matter as part of a broader suite of things.
I lost track of who I said was after Scott, but I remember I said something. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tharp. Really appreciate your being with us this morning.
Yes, sir.
I have those same constituents that Representative Brannigan has, but to my knowledge, none of them are making over $500,000 a year. And it was really great to hear from you that what some of these other states are spending that money on is school construction and school retrofits. And we have a real need for that in this state. And we have not been able to figure out, it's a big need. And we've not been able to figure out how we're going to fund that, but it's a looming, it's not a looming problem. It's a problem that's here. We're in 10 minutes, we're going to go downstairs and hear more about it with the Ed Committee. So I really appreciate your letting us know that we're not alone and that there are ways to fund that. And I think that oftentimes we're still suffering from 30 years, 40 years of sort of trickle down belief in this country. And I think we oftentimes spend a lot of time thinking or worrying that people who are wealthy don't have enough money. And I'd like for us to stop doing that.
Kurt.
Thank you, Kurt, Catherine, Peter, but we have like just a very few minutes left because Kirby has something to share with us that we might actually put off until another time. Is that okay with you, Kirby? Okay, great.
Mine might be a longer answer, but.
That's okay.
Okay. I was just wondering how are the proposals in this bill compared to the ones that you mentioned in other states that are doing a similar tax surcharge?
That's a great question. These sorts of policies do have a bit of diversity. There's no sort of one sort of off-the-shelf turnkey best practice. There are several states that have gone the route of just sort of increasing their existing sort of top marginal tax rates or kind of adding a new bracket. This policy is sort of similar to what was enacted in Massachusetts, and I believe exists in California as well, of again being a sort of a share of taxable income above a certain amount. And so there's a bit of a diversity in terms of the size, might be a good way to think about it, of this policy. It is not sort of outsized, if you will, relative to the other sorts of, again, kind of often referred to as millionaires taxes that have been enacted in, probably around a dozen states, given some recent reforms, since the start of the 2000s, and places including New York, New Jersey, Maryland for a time, Minnesota, and a few others.
Thank you.
Peter, Catherine? Peter, do you still have something?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to bring us back to the idea of looking at a suite of taxes. Because if you're very wealthy and you're literally evaluating the cost of one state versus another, it's the totality of taxation that really matters, not focusing on what your effective tax rate on the income tax is. And many of these people, well-off people, we have learned from testimony yesterday, particularly, receive income not in taxable income form anyway. And so the rates that we will be changing don't necessarily always hit the wealthiest people anyway, because they may, in fact, make most of their money through appreciation of real property or financial assets. Thanks.
Yeah, I just had sort of similar, I think, comments that for me, it's really important that as much as we think about gaps and new revenue that we're looking for, that we're having a holistic conversation. And I think you said this yesterday, Kornheiser, that at this point, we're having an either or conversation. And do we want to raise revenue from consumption taxes and sugary beverages, or from, our highest income earners, or property taxes? And for me, it's really important to think about how we stack those all up and how can we focus on fairness and progressivity is important for me as opposed to regressivity. So maybe some whiteboarding, some charts. I mean, I think we've had some presentations already that have showed us that, the graphs, but we can keep coming back to that and looking at the different proposals in front of us and deciding what best aligns with our values feels really important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was a delightful coincidence that the ITEP report sort of came out after many years, right, as we were starting this conversation. But I think continuing to go back to those charts is really, really helpful. I think Joyce has helped us with that as well. Scott?
A lot of people have thrown out their anecdotal, so I will as well. I have said goodbye to a number of Vermont residents that told me that they left Vermont to go to New Hampshire because of taxation, either the income tax or the estate tax. And that's with our existing very progressive income tax system. And I have welcomed many people from New Hampshire to Vermont. I have never welcomed a New Hampshireite to Vermont that said they came because of taxes, ever. And I would also just make the point, and I get the committee that we're in, we are a taxation committee, we raise revenue, that is what we do. But maybe the answer to our fiscal problems is not always to increase revenue. Maybe part of that solution is for the appropriations committees in this building to look at the spending side of the issue.
I appreciate that. I'm going to throw out my anecdote now. And then next time, as the final word, and next time we meet, we can go back to data. I will say that every new person that I have welcomed into my community over the last few years has moved here from significantly lower tax states. And they have moved to my community because they wanted their children to be safe and welcomed and loved and supported. And they wanted the infrastructure that we have here. They wanted the childcare. They want the strong schools. They want strong neighborhoods. And they have told me that over and over again. It's actually been shocking. And as I welcomed, my daughter started going to UVM, I met her roommate's parents. They were moving in the middle of moving here from Texas because they wanted to live somewhere that felt like safe and welcoming and connected. And they were willing to, pay property taxes here for that and pay, all kinds of higher taxes because they wanted to kind of state that we build here with the resources that we have. So and I live right on that like delightful triangle of New Hampshire and Massachusetts, where we saw the lawn signs going up for the, the changes in Massachusetts, and we have New Hampshire sitting right there. And folks tend to be staying in Brattleboro right now. So with that, We're heading downstairs on our field trip. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Tharp. Really appreciate